I knew something was wrong the minute Ethan Cole walked through the glass doors of Braverton Systems, wearing a sapphire velvet blazer and loafers shiny enough to signal satellites. His handshake was damp, his grin practiced, and his first question before even finding the restroom was, "So, what exactly do you do here?" After 20 years in risk and controls, I'd seen everything: ghost vendors, falsified reimbursements, even a marketing VP who billed the company for her dog's therapy sessions. But Ethan? He was a different breed. Not because he was clever, far from it, but because he was so convinced his buzzwords could substitute for competence. When my former boss, Harold Green, retired, I braced for turbulence. What I didn't expect was a man whose entire understanding of compliance could fit on a Post-it note. Within 2 weeks, Ethan had modernized 3 of our internal policies, meaning he deleted them and replaced them with a 2-line memo about streamlined governance. I didn't fight it. Not yet. I did what I always did. Documented everything, flagged anomalies, and copied him per protocol. That Tuesday morning, during a joint meeting with finance and procurement, it happened. I was midway through explaining a vendor discrepancy when Ethan interrupted, voice dripping with disdain. "Laura, stop CCing me on your paranoid reports." The room went silent. Our finance director nearly choked on her water. I blinked once. Paranoid, for flagging a vendor whose quarterly invoice jumped $220K with no change in scope? For reminding people that backdating approvals is still illegal under federal statute? Here's the thing about being called paranoid in corporate America. It usually means you're 5 minutes ahead of a scandal. I didn't respond. I just took a sip of my cold coffee, wrote his exact words in my notes, and kept smiling. Over the next few weeks, his arrogance evolved from irritating to reckless. He began fast-tracking vendor approvals without review, signing off on department expenses he didn't oversee, and approving retroactive contracts that predated vendor onboarding. When I cautioned him via email, he replied, "Don't overthink it. We're innovating." That was the moment I realized I was documenting not incompetence, but intent. Still, I stayed quiet. I'd been through executives like him before, men who treated procedure as red tape and accountability as a nuisance. The difference was that this one was leaving digital fingerprints everywhere. Then came the tell. I was reviewing a consolidated vendor invoice when one number, a simple $37,752, didn't reconcile. The timestamp didn't match, the approval log was broken, and the entry was executed under Ethan's credentials at 11:48 p.m. I asked him, politely, for clarification. His reply, "You're not here to dig, just report." That's when the seatbelt clicked. I wasn't trying to destroy him, but I wasn't about to be collateral damage in his house of cards. So I did what any senior compliance officer with a conscience would do. I quietly removed him from the CC line and sent my next report straight to corporate compliance. That Friday's finance sync was unforgettable. Ethan leaned back in his ergonomic throne, custom ordered, naturally, laughed, and said, "Oh, Laura again with the vendor paranoia. Should we audit the janitors next? Maybe see if the coffee guy has offshore accounts?" The room gave that polite, nervous laughter that meant no one wanted to be there. I didn't flinch. I clicked to the next slide and said, "Per policy, any flagged invoice over $125K without documentation must be escalated within 48 hours. That clock started yesterday." He waved me off. "We're sunsetting that policy. Too much bureaucracy." He smirked. "We're replacing it with a streamlined framework." His framework meant skipping finance review, removing dual sign-offs, and introducing a new phrase, retroactive alignment, which was corporate for sign it later and pray nobody notices. My inbox turned into a ghost town. The monthly risk review call? Canceled, replaced by a Slack channel titled "Hat No Red Tape." I tried one last private conversation, caught him between his so-called vision workshop and a foam sword team-building session. "Ethan, You're approving transactions without oversight. That's serious exposure. He didn't look up from his phone. You worry too much. This is why compliance kills creativity. That's when I knew. I wasn't working in operations anymore. I was living in a crime scene waiting for the audit. The next week, I stopped hoping for reason. I opened the invoice archive and started digging, the way you do when instinct won't let you sleep. Deep inside a folder labeled Vendor Reclass Q2-ish Cleanup, his naming conventions were always suspiciously vague. I found something ugly, a single invoice from a new IT vendor dated April 3rd. The catch? That vendor wasn't even onboarded until April 17th. The entry was split in two. Same deliverable, same week. 2 payments just under $150K each, neatly below the $175K auto-escalation threshold. Cute trick. I cross-referenced project logs. No record. Approval trail? 1 line. Approved, E. Cole. At first, I told myself maybe it was a clerical error. Maybe someone mistyped a date. But then I noticed patterns, repeated amounts, split charges, missing documentation, and the same authorization every time. His. I opened a spreadsheet and started logging them one by one. By the third night, the pattern wasn't theory. It was evidence. I called it Ethan Ghost Trail. 7 invoices from fast-tracked vendors he personally approved. All had timestamps logged after midnight. One even showed an entry at 2:14 a.m. because nothing screams legitimate business like approving vendor payouts while most of the city's asleep. I wanted to believe it was sloppiness, but the amounts, the timing, the repetition, this was design. Still, I had no proof of intent, just a map of negligence dressed up as innovation. It was a gray, rainy Wednesday when I decided to cross the line. The office was half empty, the air thick with the hum of burnout and fluorescent lights. Ethan had called in sick, which probably meant he was at some leadership retreat learning how to weaponize charisma. I took advantage of the quiet. Hours disappeared into audit logs, ERP exports, and compliance dashboards. At 3:07 p.m., I found the nail in the coffin: manual vendor entries with no IP proxy, no system backup, all executed from Ethan's account, but not from his workstation. Remote access, clean trace, but real. I brought over Mark, our senior IT analyst, and asked him to verify. He checked, frowned, and said, "Manual overrides. No automation." He typed those in himself. That's when the chill hit my spine. Not panic, resolve. The kind of cold calm that comes when you realize silence makes you complicit. I drafted an email, subject line: Vendor entry discrepancies. Request for clarification. Attached. Screenshots, invoice IDs, timestamps, and our official documentation policy. The tone was polite, neutral, professional. His reply arrived 6 minutes later. You're not here to dig, just report. No greeting, no signature, just that one sentence. I stared at it long enough to feel my jaw tighten. Then I opened the compliance escalation template, removed him from the CC field, and sent my full report, encrypted, to Corporate Compliance Officer Julia Whitmore. Subject: Pattern of vendor anomalies. Immediate review. Recommended. Send. The click was soft, anticlimactic, like a door quietly locking behind me. I'd done my part. Now it was up to the system. But the system stayed silent. A week passed, then 2. No response from Julia. No acknowledgement. No calendar invite. Nothing. Meanwhile, Ethan got bolder. He revoked my access to 2 vendor portals I'd managed for years. No explanation, no warning. I logged in one morning, and my permissions were gone. When I asked, he smiled that smug tech bro smile. We're realigning roles to match strengths. My new assignment? Legacy Archive Optimization. Translation: cleaning up obsolete contracts in SharePoint purgatory. I'd been shelved, invisible. Procurement stopped copying me on threads. Finance went silent. Legal ignored my memos. Even my badge stopped opening the executive conference wing. That's where Ethan held his leadership huddles. Half motivational seminar, half self-promotion rally. I told myself it was temporary, that compliance would catch up, that I'd done the right thing. But whispers spread. She used to be close with Harold. She flagged Ethan to corporate. She's difficult. People stopped sitting near me in meetings. The Slack jokes died when I joined a channel. Even friends grew distant, not because they didn't believe me, but because no one wants to stand next to the person the current carried toward the drain. There's a particular smell to career death, and it makes people scatter. I could feel it happening in real time. By the third week of silence, I'd started questioning everything: my instincts, my choices, even my sanity. Late one night, long after most of the office had gone home, I sat under the sterile glow of dual monitors, staring at the folder labeled Ethan Ghost Trail. My finger hovered over delete. Maybe it was time to let it go, I thought. Maybe surviving meant fading back into the background until retirement, pretending none of this happened. Then a new calendar invite popped up on my screen. Subject: Compliance Pre-Audit Review. From Julia Whitmore. No other invitees. My heart didn't race. It just steadied, like an engine turning over. I clicked accept. Tuesday arrived dressed like a funeral. Gray skies, dead silence, and that same burnt coffee smell clinging to the break room. The invite sat between workplace positivity and quarterly vendor review, an ordinary little box that felt like the opening move in a very dangerous game. No prep docs, no agenda, just a Zoom link and one polite note: please be ready to discuss your Q2 findings in confidence. I logged in 2 minutes early because old habits die hard. The black screen read, "Your host will let you in shortly." My reflection stared back at me, eyes tired, mouth tight. Then a click, and there she was, Julia Whitmore, in her usual navy blazer, expression carved from calm authority. "Hi, Laura," she said, voice even, eyes assessing. "Thanks for joining." I returned the greeting, trying to keep my tone steady. It felt strange speaking to someone who still acknowledged my existence. Julia didn't waste time. "I've reviewed your documentation," she said, adjusting her glasses. "Let's just say it was illuminating." A pulse beat behind my ear. She shared her screen. There it was, my vendor log, color-coded red. Then a new column, exposure level. 3 entries marked level 1, high risk. She scrolled. "We've identified multiple irregularities requiring immediate escalation. After reviewing your findings, we've decided to trigger an unscheduled audit." I blinked. "This quarter?" "Next week," she replied. "The team's already booked." Quiet rollout. No advance notice to operational leadership. My screen felt too bright, my chair too stiff. "Understood?" I managed. Julia leaned forward slightly. "We'll need your discretion and your support walking the auditors through your findings." Support. That was corporate for, "You're about to walk through fire again." "Of course," I said. Her tone softened by half a degree. "You did the right thing, Laura. Just so we're clear, this could have gone very differently if you hadn't flagged it." I didn't feel relief. Just gravity. The kind that settles in your stomach before a fall. She thanked me, ended the call, and the Zoom window went black, leaving me staring at my reflection again, blinking at the ghost of a woman who'd just lit a fuse. 5 days. That's how long I had to act normal. 5 days to sit through meetings, smile through small talk, and pretend I didn't know an entire audit team was inbound like a firing squad in blazers. Then, 2 days early, they arrived. No warning. 6 people in dark suits, rolling silver carry-ons through the lobby at 7:12 a.m., like accountants on a covert mission. By 8 o'clock, rumors were spreading faster than printer paper. The receptionist whispered to facilities. Facilities told security. By 8:30, everyone on the 6th floor knew something big was happening. Ethan showed up at 8:41, holding his usual green smoothie, humming whatever upbeat nonsense passed for confidence. He didn't notice the auditors unpacking binders in the glass conference room, at least not until it was too late. He froze mid-stride, blinked twice, then smiled like he'd walked into a surprise party. I watched from the stairwell. His swagger dimmed when he saw Julia standing there. I stayed at my desk. I wasn't stupid enough to step into the blast zone. My name was on the report. My fingerprints were on the grenade. Still, I could feel the tremors, people moving faster, eyes darting. The usual office soundtrack of keystrokes and chatter was replaced by the hush of fear. Even Mark from IT, normally chatty, walked by clutching his laptop like a shield. By 9:15, the blinds on the executive boardroom were closed. That never happened. Closed blinds meant tears, legal threats, or both. I didn't need to see what came next. I'd already written it. By 10 a.m., the building had gone eerily still, like the moment before a thunderclap. The only sounds were the muted clicks of keyboards and the low murmur from behind the closed boardroom blinds. Then the email requests began. Access logs, archived invoices, vendor master files. The audit team wanted everything. I was accidentally copied on one of their requests, or maybe not accidentally. It was for the vendor onboarding dashboard I'd built before Ethan streamlined it out of existence. Subject line, urgent. Archived controls, environment. Sender, J. Whitmore. I pictured Julia standing behind the auditors, arms crossed, watching Ethan try to turn a bonfire into a candlelight dinner. I didn't have to be in the room to know how it was going. He'd be charming at first, his go-to defense mechanism. He'd talk about agile controls and modernized governance frameworks, spinning jargon until words lost meaning. But I also knew this audit team. They didn't laugh. They didn't nod. They measured lies in data and timestamps. At 10:42 a.m., I caught a glimpse through the narrow gap in the blinds. Ethan stood gesturing wildly, palms out, face flushed. One of the auditors held up a printout, pointed at something. Ethan stopped mid-motion, his jaw tightened. Then the blinds snapped shut. I exhaled for what felt like the first time all morning. By noon, legal had restricted access to the shared drive. Finance had gone dark. The cafeteria even posted a sign, closed for private event. The silence felt heavy, vibrating in the walls. I didn't move from my desk, just sat there waiting, because waiting was what compliance professionals did best. Every footstep in the hallway made my pulse hitch. At 2:13 p.m., a calendar notification appeared. Quick clarification. Audit team follow-up. Location. Executive boardroom. Time. Now. No sender listed, just a gray corporate summons. My reflection stared back at me from my monitor. Hair pinned, collar straight, expression unreadable. I walked the hallway like it was a courthouse corridor, each step measured. The boardroom door was open. Inside, the CEO, legal, Julia, 2 auditors, and Ethan. He wasn't sitting. His posture screamed panic disguised as defiance. Sweat darkened the fabric under his arms. He looked like a man already halfway through his own undoing. "Laura," Julia said, nodding. "Thanks for joining. Just a few confirmations regarding your submission." I nodded, taking the empty chair across from her. My report, the report, lay on the table, bound, highlighted, annotated. Across the top, a red header. Level 1 escalation. Financial risk exposure, 40.1 M. "Ms. Harris," the CEO began, voice low but sharp. "You authored this?" "Yes, And the entries listed here represent vendor transactions bypassing standard approval workflows. They do. I verified them against audit log metadata twice before submission. He flipped through the pages, his thumb trembling slightly. Clause 7B, he read aloud. All third-party expenditures exceeding $25,000 must route through risk and controls with final sign-off from the director or delegate. He looked up. Ethan signed off on nearly half of these, without routing, without review, without documentation. Ethan's mouth opened, but the CEO raised a hand. Not yet. Julia's tone was surgical. The timestamps and signature sequences show deliberate override behavior. These aren't clerical errors. The air in the room thickened. The CEO stared at Ethan, not angry yet, just cold. What chaos did you just unleash? Ethan's lips parted. Nothing came out. He looked like a man trying to explain a crash while still holding the steering wheel. Legal cleared her throat. We'll need to disclose to our financial partners immediately, Julia added, and file preliminary notice with the regulator before end-of-quarter reporting. Failure to do so triggers automatic penalties. The CEO turned back to Ethan. Out. Now. For a moment, Ethan didn't move. Then, realizing no one would save him, he left. No words, just the squeak of his shoes and the dull click of the closing door. Julia exhaled quietly. Laura, we'll need you to assist the auditors with remediation. Walk them through everything you found. Of course, I said, steady but distant. No one smiled. No one thanked me. But in that room, surrounded by binders and silence, acknowledgement wasn't necessary. The truth had already done the talking. It took less than 30 minutes for Ethan to make his last pathetic move. I was back at my desk, trying to breathe again, when a new internal message blinked in the corner of my screen. Conference 3B. Immediate. Context discussion requested by E. Cole. I almost laughed. Context? The man had already buried himself under $40 million worth of bad approvals. What context could possibly save him now? Still, protocol demanded attendance, so I grabbed my notebook and badge, steadied my breath, and walked to the small glass-walled conference room everyone jokingly called the fishbowl. Inside sat the CEO, legal, Julia, one of the lead auditors, and Ethan standing again because sitting would have meant admitting gravity existed. His tie was crooked, his face blotchy with anger and fear. The moment I entered, he pounced. "This is a witch hunt," he barked, voice cracking halfway through the word witch. "Laura's had this information for months. She buried it. If anything, she's the one who dropped the ball. She wanted this to blow up." The accusation hung in the air, absurd but sharp. The CEO didn't move. Legal didn't blink. Julia, though, tilted her head slightly, the kind of motion that said, "You've just stepped into your own trap." She slid a single folder across the table, opened it to a printed timeline, and spoke with calm precision. Every alert, every escalation, every flagged anomaly. Dated, time-stamped, routed through the correct chain. The oldest entry, 7 months ago. She tapped the page with a pen. Each one either ignored by you or overwritten using your credentials. Would you like me to read the email headers? Ethan's mouth opened again, then closed. No words, just the faint sound of his breathing filling the silence. The board's attorney, who hadn't said a thing all day, finally looked up. "They were flagged," she said evenly. "You ignored them." Silence hit the room like a vacuum. Ethan's shoulders sagged. He stared down at the polished table like it had betrayed him. For a moment, he seemed to search for something, any explanation, any scapegoat. But nothing came. He was out of moves. The CEO stood. HR's waiting outside. Ethan blinked. "I don't." The single word landed like a verdict. He turned slowly, like a man underwater, and shuffled out. The door clicked shut behind him, sealing the chapter for good. No one in the room moved for a moment. The air felt dense with aftermath. Julia closed the folder and finally exhaled. We'll need to start remediation immediately. Laura, you'll remain as liaison until further notice. Understood, I said. My voice didn't shake, but inside, my pulse was still chasing the echo of his accusations. Legal added, we'll be drafting our self-reporting disclosure today. If there's any documentation you haven't included, please send it now. It's all there, I replied. Folder name, Ghost Trail. Julia gave a small nod, almost imperceptible, the kind that wasn't gratitude, but acknowledgement. When I stepped back into the hallway, it felt different, cleaner somehow. Same gray carpet, same flickering fluorescent over the copier, but the static in the air had shifted. People looked up from their screens when I walked by. Some smiled faintly. Others avoided eye contact, unsure which version of me they were supposed to see now. The pariah or the survivor. At my desk, a single white envelope leaned against my monitor. Inside, a new ID badge. Temporary reassignment, risk and compliance lead. No title change, no raise, just a placeholder of authority. But to me, it felt like armor. Emails were already pouring in. Vendor audit assistance request. Immediate controls verification. Compliance restoration plan. The same inbox that had been a ghost town 2 weeks ago was now the nerve center of the entire operation. I didn't celebrate. There was nothing to celebrate. Ethan's mess had cost the company millions, and the fallout was far from over. But for the first time in months, I wasn't invisible. I spent that evening alone in the office, cleaning up old compliance dashboards, reopening workflows he'd shut down, and restoring the internal audit log index. As the sky outside turned from gray to indigo, I glanced toward the corner office. Ethan's old domain. The nameplate had already been removed. The glass door stood blank, frosted over, nothing behind it but an empty chair and a desk that looked smaller without his ego sitting on top of it. I didn't stop to stare. I just walked past, quietly, toward my own office, the one where the work still mattered. The damage report was scheduled for 7:30 a.m. Early enough that the halls were still empty, the air still humming with that sterile quiet that only existed before the first pot of coffee brewed. Closed door, executive level only. No assistants, no notes, no PR filters, just 12 chairs, one long table, and the wreckage of everything Ethan had broken displayed across a 60-inch monitor. I arrived 15 minutes early, as always. I wore navy, no frills, no jewelry, just clean lines and pressed fabric, professionalism masquerading as armor. My hair was tied back, my notes printed, my backup drive encrypted and labeled. I wasn't here to make a point. I was here to bury what needed burying. The CEO nodded as I entered, a faint gesture of acknowledgement. Julia sat near him, expression steady, eyes focused on her tablet. Legal was flanked by 2 external auditors brought in to assess exposure. No one spoke until the door clicked shut. Then the CEO said simply, "Let's begin." They gave me 20 minutes. I took 12. I spoke in measured sentences, the way you learn to after decades in risk. Clean, precise, emotionless. Slide 1. Vendor hash, 14,328. Retroactive billing for unscoped services. Slide 2. Duplicate invoice clusters, Delta 04 through Delta 08. Signatures forged using admin credentials after midnight. Slide 3. Control failures, 6 policy breaches, 14 unlogged approvals, estimated exposure, $40.3 million. I didn't editorialize. I didn't embellish. I let the numbers breathe. Every data point was a nail. Every timestamp, a hammer strike. When the CFO tried to interrupt, his voice tight, defensive, I just advanced the slide to a screenshot of my original escalation memo. bullet points, timestamps, receipts, and at the bottom, faint gray text from Ethan's last message. Stop CCing me on your paranoid reports. Silence. Not the awkward kind, the kind that fills every corner of a room and leaves nowhere to hide. The CEO leaned back in his chair, rubbing the bridge of his nose. The auditors sat motionless, eyes fixed on the screen. Legal exhaled through her nose. Then, from the far end of the table, the CFO muttered under his breath. This is why you CC people. No one laughed. No one smiled. It was the closest thing to a eulogy Ethan would ever get. I closed my laptop and sat back. The CEO finally spoke, voice low but steady. We'll issue the regulatory disclosures today. Legal, coordinate with finance on remediation. Julia, I want compliance restored immediately. No delays, no shortcuts. Julia nodded once. Already underway. Then she turned to me. Laura, your documentation, your work, prevented this from escalating further. You'll need to oversee the interim controls process until we hire a replacement. A replacement for Ethan. Of course, I said. There was no applause, no congratulations, just weary acknowledgement, the kind of respect that doesn't need ceremony. The meeting ended with a handful of nods and the faint scrape of chairs across tile. As everyone filed out, the CEO lingered for half a second. Good work, he said quietly. Not warm, not performative, just real. I packed my files, shut down the projector, and left the room. The corridors felt longer than usual, washed in early sunlight, cutting through frosted glass. My heels echoed softly against the floor as I passed procurement, then finance, then the frosted door that used to read Ethan Cole, VP, Strategic Operations. Now it was just a blank pane. Empty office, blinds drawn, a hollow space where arrogance used to breathe. Back at my desk, the hum of my monitor returned. My inbox pinged. Temporary assignment authorization, interim head of compliance and ethics. Beneath it, a second message. Restoration plan kickoff. Monday, 8 a.m. I didn't open them right away. I just sat there, letting the quiet settle. The city outside was waking up. Sunlight spilled across my keyboard. No victory speech, no justice montage, just a desk, a badge, and the faint sound of a company remembering how to breathe. I took a deep breath myself, because I wasn't done. Not yet. There were policies to rebuild, controls to restore, and a culture to repair. And somewhere in the wreckage, I still had a job to do. By Monday, the whole company felt different. Still damaged, but quieter, like the static had finally burned itself out. The sixth floor, once buzzing with Ethan's innovation huddles and empty jargon, had turned into an open clinic for accountability. People spoke in low voices, walked a little faster, replied to emails with a new kind of precision. Nobody called it fear, but everyone knew it was. The ghost of $40 million tends to haunt the hallways for a while. I was at my desk by 7 o'clock a.m., coffee steaming beside a stack of compliance forms thicker than a novel. The first meeting on my calendar, Vendor Controls Restoration Plan, Kickoff. The title alone felt like a small victory. Julia arrived 5 minutes later, same no-nonsense energy as always. She dropped a binder on my desk and said, "You're officially interim head until further notice. Don't let them bury this." Then she gave a small, tired smile, the kind only someone who's seen too many fires can manage, and walked out. So I started rebuilding, slowly, methodically, line by line. I reinstated every internal control Ethan had sunsetted, rewrote the vendor approval matrix, and reactivated the compliance dashboards he'd deleted in his campaign for agility. Procurement grumbled, finance sighed. Legal hovered nervously over every word I sent, but I didn't care. The era of streamlined oversight was over. By midweek, I'd restored the quarterly risk review, relaunched the cross-department compliance sync, and rebuilt the audit trail from scratch. My office, once silent, ignored, half-exiled, had become a revolving door. People who'd avoided eye contact a month ago now appeared at my door with cautious respect. "Do you want us to start logging the sub-vendor approvals again? Should we flag discrepancies over 100K or keep the old threshold?" It was exhausting, but in a way that felt right, like sweeping up after a storm. Debris everywhere, but progress visible. One afternoon, while sorting old shared drives, I found the original Ghost Trail folder. My notes, screenshots, timestamps, all still there, untouched. I hovered over it, considering whether to delete it now that the truth had done its work. But I couldn't. It wasn't just evidence anymore. It was a reminder of what happens when silence pretends to be safety. So I renamed it Institutional Memory and archived it under Compliance, Training, Ethics Case Studies. Future hires would read it and understand why vigilance matters. A week later, Julia called another executive briefing. This time, no tension, no drama, just progress. She ran through audit updates, regulatory filings, and remediation results. The exposure number had dropped, down to $4.7 million after reversals and recoveries. When she finished, she glanced toward me. "Laura," she said, "would you close this out?" I stood, adjusted my blazer, and kept it simple. "We've restored operational compliance to baseline. Vendor oversight is reinstated. No further discrepancies detected." Then I paused. There's just one more note I'd like recorded. Compliance isn't paranoia. It's prevention. For a beat, the room was silent. Then the CEO nodded once and said, "Duly noted." After the meeting, as people filtered out, the CFO, same man who'd muttered, "This is why you CC people," stopped at the door. "You saved us, you know," he said quietly. I didn't answer. You don't save a company from someone like Ethan. You just hold the line long enough for the truth to surface. That evening, as sunset poured gold across the glass walls, I packed my bag slowly. The floor was empty now. The hum of printers had faded. I glanced once more toward the frosted door that used to bear Ethan's name. It was still blank, still quiet. I thought about the first day he'd called me paranoid, about how certain he'd been that oversight was an obstacle instead of protection, about how easy it is for arrogance to mistake accountability for attack. Then I smiled, faintly, to no one in particular. Before leaving, I opened a fresh memo template and typed a single line at the top. Ethics isn't optional. It's infrastructure. Saved it. Logged off. As I walked toward the elevator, the building lights dimmed behind me. No victory parade, no applause. Just a quiet, steady heartbeat in the walls, a system alive again. And for the first time in a long while, it felt like enough.